Hey everybody, this is Brian Bush. We had Dr. Darcy Tlinko come in and talk about red crown rot and tar spot. Unfortunately, that video got lost. We had a corrupted file and it didn't work out quite right. So uh, in this video, you're going to be able to find the links at the end here to actually Darcy giving these similar talks here as well. But I want to kind of summarize what she covered um, and thank her for coming up here too. So we'll try and keep us about 10 minutes. But there's a lot of good content here. Really valued Dr. Tlinko coming out and talking with us here. So, with no further ado, jumping into it. So she started off. Next slide. All right, starting off with tar spot management. So we've all seen this here. One important takeaway I had with Dr. Tlinko said here on this right side picture here, you're going to find tar spot at the end of the season. When the plants die, turn brown, you're going to find tar spot. So the idea of trying to keep a plant completely green all the way through and including through harvest is not realistic. So don't plan on that. So this was Dr. Tlinko's 10 points on thinking about tar spot and how to manage things. So I'll kind of pause here for a second before moving on. I'm not going to go through every slide she covered. I'm trying to hit the highlights here. So for me, you got to know about the disease triangle. So I'm going to quickly put this up here. Big part of disease triangle here. So we have the pathogen now. We have the tar spot pathogen here. All corn is susceptible to varying degrees. Some's a lot more resistant than others. Biggest thing that is in our variable, the biggest variable we have is the environment. So if we don't have favorable conditions here, we might see a little bit of disease. If we have the right temperature range, the right moisture, right leaf wetness, we can have a lot of disease like we had in 2024. So here's another key takeaway from me. She doesn't have 5% up here, but if you find 15% or 25% tar spot on the ear leaf, don't bother spraying fungicide. You missed the window and those plants are dead. They just don't know it yet. Really, that threshold is about 5%. We have 5% on the ear leaf and you do not have a fungicide down to control it. It's game over. So weather, temperature is critical. A big part of this is the average high and low for the day needs to be between 64 and 73 degrees over about a 30-day period. That's a little bit cooler than what we typically think of in our part of the world here. If you get warmer than that, it slows progression, doesn't stop it. Moisture. We need moisture for the spores to germinate, but you can't be too wet. It doesn't want saturated, really wet and dewy kind of leaves. So it's kind of a wetting and drying back and forth there. If we get really wet, especially at high temperatures, it kind of slows the disease. There is an app out there called Tar Spotter, which kind of uses these weather conditions to try and predict when we might be having infections, or it might make sense to be spraying fungicides. So 2021 was a year of severe epidemic loss. So bad disease. And you can see in that year the temperatures. Across northern Indiana, they had a cool May, average, maybe a little warmer than average June, cool July. Those 2 cool months allowed tar spot to get a foothold and cause bad conditions. In 2022, they had very little disease and it moved in late. So if you look over here, think about like later July into August, that's when it finally cooled down a little bit, which allowed the infections to take place. And the disease came in so late, it really didn't hit the yield, didn't hinder yield at all. Also, you need some moisture, but not a lot. In 2021, they had a little bit of wetting and drying here, but conversely, in 2022, look how dry June was. It almost stopped that progression for a month's time before it came back up again. So by the time it started up again, it was too late to really impact yields. Scouting. So you have to know the disease cycle. Quick summary on this at the very bottom here. The fungus overwinters in our residue. When we get the right temperatures, right leaf wetness, releases those spores, they fly through the air up to 200 feet, 50 feet in the air, which was a shocking thing to me. So that's why they can blow from field to field pretty easily here. After the infection takes place, it takes 14 to 21 days to actually see those stromata, those black spots, and that cycle continues. Post resistance is important. There are differences between hybrids. There's differences between companies' products. but there's no corn that's completely immune to the disease. Sometimes what will happen is if it's susceptible enough, you'll actually kill these plants prematurely. So you'll see a lot of brown in here. You can see the tar spot on these leaves. There's tar spot over here as well, but this is a much more resistant hybrid. It's fighting off the disease. It's still staying greener, continuing to fill grain, add to yield potential. Fungicides work, but tar spot can kind of test this a little bit. There is a rating here on the Crop Protection Network website for tar spot by fungicide. They give you a rating here. So I'd encourage you to check the fungicides you're planning on using to make sure they are listed on this sheet and give you at least a good to very good rating. Timing. We can be too early, too late. One of the reasons why I've had many people say, well, how about spraying fungicide when I'm doing my post-herbicide pass? Well, our goal with that application is actually putting herbicide on the ground, not on the leaves. If you sprayed at V6, that's great. You're going to cover these plants. So you look at this, you're going to spray these. What that translates over to is on the V12 plant, you protect these lower leaves. All this upper tissue is not protected. If you come and spray at V12, well, that can work out because sometimes that, V10, 12, 14 is kind of the ear leaf. We can at least have the ear leaf protected, which is one of our goals with spraying fungicide. But you protect this, everything above that is unprotected. So what are we trying to protect on the plant? Dr. Schlenkel's data has shown that if you're going to spray one time, with this situation here, the disease did not show up. You couldn't see disease until R2. But the tar spot severity, by spraying here at blister, because it's R2 stage, actually had the least amount of disease take off. So this is kind of the window she's talking about, saying, if you're going to spray somewhere in that tassel to milk stage is a pretty good timing, year in, year out, to try and control the disease. ROI also appears to be your best on that. So these green lines of what was the ROI, including the cost of your fungicide and the yield increase or decrease you saw there. Going out late, if the disease is too much, again, you don't get that return. So you're not making money in that situation. Now, one application versus two applications. She got some great data on this. Remember, 2021 was a heavy disease year, heavy tar spot year in northern Indiana. So, Feltima being a fungicide that's rated better for tar spot, Lucento is not quite as good. In this data set, one application was a 7.5 bushel break-even cost. So in this situation, several of the applications, single applications, paid off, regardless of the product you use. But if you're going to spray twice in a heavy disease year, yeah, that can pencil out. So you can spraying twice more than made itself back. Definitely worked out better on the fungicide that was rated better for tar spot than the one that's a little bit weaker. Now, 2022, low disease year. Still 7.5 bushel break even. None of the treatments broke even that year. Two applications, it's a 15 bushel break even. None of these either broke even. So know what's out there. Not every year is it going to pay to spray once, maybe even twice. I would maybe argue in Southern Indiana, probably a little more likely because we have other diseases that are typically yield limiting for us. This is the data set she had to share. Will never be 100% clean at the end of the season. I kind of touched on that earlier. Stewardship. This is kind of a new one to me. So when you think about it, we only have 4 fungicides we use in corn and soybeans. Soybeans gets this one, but really only 3 in corn. And part of the concern is the DMIs, the triazoles, are actually used in humans and animals. As we start talking about more and more resistance building up, there are people within the EPA who are pointing to us farmers saying we are overusing fungicides, causing issues that could show up and have more fungal diseases in animals and humans. So that's just one to watch out. Make sure we're not just spraying anytime, every time. We have a reason why we're using these fungicides. There are tools out there, being Tar Spotter, Dr. Schlenkel's own website showing where she's finding the disease. And she said, keep asking questions, keep pushing her with new ideas, new philosophies, so she knows what to study and how to help us be better and help generate data so we can be smarter about this disease. Dr. Klinko's takeaway slide here. So we need to assess the risk. Is it endemic in your area? The answer is yes for us. You can see here, she actually found tar spot in every single county in Indiana in 2024. Talk to your CTL person about hybrid resistance. Know how resistant your hybrids are, so you can plan your applications and your strategy ahead of time. Consider fungicides. Timing is very important. Understand where the disease is at. Use apps like Tar Spotter to understand what the favorable conditions are. If you're irrigating, don't over irrigate, because the more you wet that crop, the more you're going to see it. One thing she said here, rotating isn't really working because those spores are blowing hundreds of feet into the air, traveling miles with the winds. So we're probably not as effective here, kind of rotating and residue management. But that's kind of big takeaways here. This was a pretty cool slide too. When are you finding tar spot? Would you see a benefit from spraying? And then some additional comments here. So late vegetative, maybe not, but there have been years that it has paid off. If you're going to spray early though, you may need a second spray. BT, R2, R3. Yes, you can spray then. You'll see a benefit from spraying, but you might need a second spray. By the time you get to milk stage though, you probably don't need an application. If your first application is made at milk, you probably won't need to spray a second time. So that's an interesting way of looking at this. And then there's a great new tool out there, this fungicide ROI calculator. You can plug in your yield goals, your price for your corn, the product you're using, the cost, and it will help you determine your return on your investment. So that was pretty neat on the tar spot. It would transition to red crown rot. So red crown rot, this is the genus species. As a general statement, this infects legumes like peanuts, like alfalfa. Not the same disease we're battling in soybeans, but the same genus does that. So what has been known historically, this has been a pest across Virginia, the Carolinas, Alabama, Mississippi, and definitely throughout Louisiana, where a lot of literature is based on it. 2024, this is the extent of it. So we've had this pest across across Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana for about 2 to 3 years now. In our backyard, we might have 3 years, 2 years, but it's not near as widespread as what it is in some other areas of Illinois and Kentucky. Disease cycle. One negative to this disease, unfortunately, is it has a structure called a mycosclerotia. Those survive for many years in the soil. So rotation away, it may be several years, 10 years before these mycosclerotia might all be gone from the soil. So rotation is going to be tougher to solve this one. But those mycosclerotia germinate and they colonize the soybean roots when the plants are small, the seedling stage, much like we think about sudden death. Similar timing on when these things get infected. So get in the plants early. One of the things that's interesting too, we find the most infection at warmer temperatures, warmer soil temperatures here. So it's not a cool and wet disease. This is a warm soil disease. That might be something that plays in our favor a little bit in certain circumstances. So it's called red crown rot because you find reddish color right above the root crown. A couple examples here of what that looks like. A couple more examples. If you can't find it here, kind of scratching off some of the dirt in that outer layer, you can find that kind of reddish color right there underneath it again. What we're typically going to find, though, is going to be the interveinal chlorosis, which looks very much like sudden death, like brown stem rot. So if disease starts off with a couple of leaves like this, you get that kind of mottled speckling appearance, progresses all the way here towards brown leaves, and leaving those green veins in place there. This is more characteristic, though. We're going to find these kind of reddish orange spherical peridothecia is the name for those, the little round balls on the lower stems and on the roots. So a couple more examples here, kind of zoomed in, what you see. A very important thing too, this disease just destroys the root system. So in many cases, you can grab these plants and pull them out quite easily because all the roots have rotted off below ground. If it's sudden death, the roots are still fairly healthy, They're just kind of plugged up there. So you can't pull those out near as easy. It's patchy across the field, but typically kind of follows water. So you can see if we had an infection right here, as the water moves down this hill, we see the infection follow that water moving through the field there. Similar situation here. What this slide just tells you is it's a nasty disease. It reduces. So blue is no disease or asymptomatic. Or gray here is symptomatic, where we have diseases. The plant weights are lower, the number of pods are lower, the number of seeds are lower, the total weight of those seeds is a fraction of what it is if you don't have this disease. So this is a major yield loss if we have this. It can be easily confused for sudden death, brown stem rot, even stem canker. So if you have questions, if you find this out in your field, you're not sure, give me a call. I'm happy to come out, try and diagnose it and figure out how bad, what the spread is on this type of disease. Submit samples, we can take care of that. If we find red crown rot, rotate to a non-host crop. So don't go back in there with soybeans again. Consider fungicide seed treatments. There's a few out there. We're actually gonna have some trials this year looking at seed treatments to try and manage red crown rot. Managing other stressors on these plants also is important. And then probably the most important one here, or a very high one, is clean your equipment. Don't drag soil and crop residue from a field that has it to a field that doesn't yet. The more we can sanitize, clean, avoid dragging soil and residue, better chance we have of keeping this disease a little more in check. That was the end of her slides. She did a phenomenal job. Like I said up front, I'll also put in a couple links to Dr. Chelenko giving this full presentation herself, so you can listen to her talk about it. But we were very lucky to have her come out here. If you have any questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer those. You can contact with these links. So hope that helps. Thanks for everybody that came, and thanks everybody for watching this.